there should be something done. I know that the motion for photography, there was, the first clause was passed for the seat on the NEC, but the second clause wasn't, which was having a council for themselves. What's your opinion?
My view was, and I would support, had I had a vote, I would have supported the second part. Right. I think there should be a photographers' council. One of the activists in my branch is a photographer, and I get a lot of information from him. But certainly, like PRs, like in broadcasting, it is a section that needs a sector that needs representation because they are a growing part of the union.
The excuse, I spoke to Dominic earlier, and the excuse that he put forward in the first part was that photography is not an industry, it is just a role. And the second part was that with the restructure they might get, a council anyway if the restructure actually goes ahead, so you never know. And that they've actually won something here today by getting a seat on the NEC. So I don't know what you think.
Well, yes, it's a step forward. I won't argue with that. But I think that...
Would you say that the photography is an industry?
Yes.
Yes.
My brother, as it happens, totally related, is a qualified photographer who went to the New York Institute of Photography. He worked in a pizza restaurant in the evenings to put together in college. But he was a photographer. And one thing that a lot of journalists and photographers in particular, you get in TV, newspapers and all sorts saying, get your mobile phone out and take pictures. And that's depriving people who are paid to go to college to learn to be a professional photographer of the job.
Yes.
And whilst I do support professional integrity, do we really want to have pictures in newspapers to come from somebody who was sitting on a bus, gets out a mobile phone and takes a picture of something in the street? No, I would rather it be done by a professional photographer who can capture the atmosphere, not just a blurred vision of the pictures.
I'm Susa Dickerson, and I'm a student delegate, and I'm interviewing Peter Murray about structure review. Could you just give us your role at the moment in the NUJ?
My role as president, I'm the senior lay officer, senior lay person, the president in the union. So I work full time as well as doing union work. I'm an NUJ rep at BBC Scotland where I work, and I've been I was elected to the National Executive Committee a while ago, and the job of president is something that's elected by the DM. So you're elected to be president of the union by the DM, and you hold office between delegate meetings.
Right.
So I've been doing this for the last 18 months, and my term of office expires on Sunday, and then Dominic, who's the vice president at the moment, he'll take over and he'll do for the period up until the next TM. And so my job is, as you see, is to chair the delegate meeting. That's one of my jobs. The other is to chair the meetings of the National Executive as they happen, and there are four or five of them a year, depending on the timetable. And then in addition to that, I mean, those are strictly speaking, that's all that the president has to do.
Right.
But you can do, if you want, you can do an awful lot more. And I've tried to do an awful lot more. I've tried to do as much as I possibly can. So on occasions, I've kind of deputised for Jeremy Deere, the General Secretary, or for Michelle Stanistreet, Deputy General Secretary. I've sometimes deputised for them, speaking outside, at conferences or public meetings or rallies or whatever. I've done a little bit I've done some film work. I've made a couple of short films for the union website. I've done a bit of that. I've spoken at a whole lot of other things. So it really depends on what you want to do with this job. But strictly speaking, according to the rule book, if you like, my job is to chair the DM and to chair the National Executive meetings.
Okay. Earlier today, there was a motion that was carried, which was motion 62, about reviewing the structure of the NUJ.
Yeah.
Is that reviewing the whole structure, including chapels, branches, the sectors and everything else?
I'm going to sound like a bit like an evasive politician at
Right,
first.
okay.
That we'll have the review and then we'll announce the results of the review,
Right,
if you like.
okay.
But having said all of that, I mean, I think the review is geared at a number of things. First of all, some of the things that Michelle Stanistreet said last night at a Fringe meeting were that one of the biggest problems is translating the fact that people are very active in the workplace, in the union, they participate in all sorts of stuff, and I know this from my own workplace. People are very, very active in the union, in the workplace, but they don't do that much else. Now, that's not a criticism at all. It's just that a lot of people don't see the relevance of the union outside of negotiating, making sure that they get their holidays at the right time, making sure the rotas are sorted out, making sure that the health and safety issues in the workplace are correct, and their wages and conditions, and all of that sort of stuff, which is really the absolute nuts and bolts of what we do. Most of what we do as union reps is exactly that. But the union does an awful lot more, and I've found out in the last 18 months that the union does tons and tons of other stuff. And so it's that, if you like, is our own little big society, really. And I think it's very important that people should see that and take part in it if they want to. And so one of the things that I hope the structural review will do is try and open the door for people to see that there is this other world in the NUJ. Now, coming to delegate meeting does that. One of my colleagues from Glasgow, who's here for the first time, she's beginning to see, that there's tons and tons of stuff more that the union can do and you can take part in. And that, I mean, for me, that's kind of part of my life as a citizen, really, is I do engage with a lot of this stuff hopefully to make me a better citizen, and I do that through the union. But I appreciate that there are an awful lot of obstacles for people engaging with all of that. They'll have family commitments, they'll have work commitments, they maybe don't quite see how the workplace stuff links with all these other big things that are going on. But we are, as I said in my opening speech, we are getting into a whole new era of activism in the UK. There is so much going on, and the union should be a route into all of that, I think. And we hope that the whole kind of wider atmosphere about engagement with local campaigns against the cuts, the fact that people will be engaging with other trade unions in that whole process will open people's eyes a little bit, and hopefully they'll begin to find the time, if you like, to engage with union activity. So that's part of the answer. I don't think the fact of chapels and branches is going to change, and the national executive is going to change. I don't think that's not because they're set in stone, but it's just that the basic idea of having a workplace unit, which is the basic part of the union, the atoms and nuclei of the union, that isn't really going to change. What will change, I think, is perhaps how some of the kind of middle-level structures of the union, the industrial councils of the union, some of the other bits in the middle may change. And one of the, I think, the most dynamic part of the union at the moment is the group chapels, which are mentioned in, they're represented here for the first time, and people from the group chapels have been speaking. They are where, in the BBC, for example, where I work, all of the different mothers and fathers of chapels, all the reps from around the UK, we meet together periodically and during times of disputes much more often, and we plan out strategic issues about are we going to go on strike? What is our attitude towards the BBC pension cuts? What's our attitude towards the cuts of the World Service, local radio, all of that sort of stuff, and even onto bigger strategic issues like what is our attitude towards the Murdoch takeover at B-Sky B and things like that. So we talk about all of that and make plans and make decisions about it all. Now, that didn't used to exist until very recently. Well, the group chapels did exist, but they haven't taken on that kind of dynamic policy-making role as well. And so I think, I mean, it's not for me to decide because I'm not going to be president any longer, but it's and it will, as Michelle said last night, it's a decision that has to be made by the members. We're going to have to engage the members in this whole policy review. But I think that the group chapels will begin to modify the way that the union runs, and I think that may be the way that things go. Sorry, that's a very, very long answer.
Can I put motion 145 to colleagues? All those in favour?
I think they do. I think they should. And I think one of the other motions that we've passed now about having a branch recruitment officer will be key to that, because it's what Jeff Apter said is not just that. Jeff Apter was the guy who moved the motion on behalf of the NEC. Jeff said, don't just go and appoint a branch recruitment officer. Make a point of having a recruitment strategy, so that over the next year you get out to the chapels and engage with them about how are we all going to recruit in that workplace there, or in a big workplace, how are we going to recruit people on the 3rd floor or the 5th floor or whatever? How are we going to get out to people that we haven't reached so far? And I think actually that, I hope, that will be a really, really important way. And it's a gift really for some chapels and branches to start to pull together in the same direction, because it really is a priority to recruit people and also to retain them, to get people to stay on, rather than, because actually I found it's quite easy sometimes when you're in the middle of a dispute or you're organising for a strike ballot, it's quite easy to get people to join. It's harder to get people to stay, 2 months after the strike, when the standing order comes in or the direct debit comes in, and they go, oh, and you have to make them think about, well, there's a point for staying in the union. It's not just about being on the picket line or whatever. Stay in the union and you get all these other benefits and you can do all these other things. So I think the branches will be absolutely vital in doing all of that, and I think that means that again, if we get back to the old nuclear model, our atoms and nuclei and stuff are together.
Will that include students and universities?
Yeah, I hope so.
Visits from guest speakers and things like that?
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I really do hope so, because I've made several promises over the last couple of months that I'm going to go to the universities around Glasgow where I live, and other university campuses as well, and I want to start doing some of that stuff. It's simply that I didn't have time, and the students themselves didn't have time, particularly over the last 2 months or so. It's coming up to exam time, so it's really tough. But for example, in Glasgow, we've got, from memory, 4 different campuses in and around the city where we already have student members, or where there's a potential to recruit student members. And what I want to do is to try and have a Glasgow. We had a meeting akin to this in Edinburgh a couple of months ago, which the Edinburgh branch is organised, and I'd like to do one for Glasgow, to bring student members in, to organise the existing student members, and to get the message out to other media and journalism students that they can join the union, and then to use that as a way of putting pressure on the incoming Scottish government, because there'll be an election in Scotland for the Scottish Parliament on the 5th of May. And in the lead up to that, we're hoping to have a Make Your Vote Count campaign with parliamentary candidates. We've got, I think, 6 or 8 meetings coming up. The one with other unions, with the PCS and the UCU and such like. Our one question that we're putting to the candidates is, what's your attitude on payment for internships? Right. Because we think that's an absolute priority, and we want to use that as a way of putting pressure on the incoming Scottish government, because they can do something about it. Yes. To make that a priority, make sure that there is money for interns, that they get at least the minimum wage, they get travel expenses, they get paid for, if they do a real bit of project work, that they should get paid properly for that. Because it's easy for companies to do that, because at the moment they're getting all this work for nothing, for months and months and months and months. It's just flat, not acceptable. And so we can do that in the next little while, and then when the students come back, September, October time, we can start to build up much more momentum around that and start holding lobbies, get a student lobby of the Scottish Parliament, for example. But we need numbers to do that, and we need a kind of a good critical mass, if you like, of students to do that. So that's, once I get some time in my hands after this is over, that's, if you like, one of my big projects for the next 6 months or so.